Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the stars through the massive viewport. The year was 2387, and humanity had spread across dozens of star systems using their jump gate technology. Jake had seen many worlds in his 30 years of service, but today felt different. Today they would meet a new species for the first time. The ship's sensors picked up something massive approaching from the edge of the system. Jake called his crew to attention as Captain Lisa Rodriguez joined him on the bridge. Lisa served as their diplomatic liaison, trained in first contact protocols that the Earth government had developed over the past century. "Admiral, we're detecting 15 large vessels approaching our position," reported Lieutenant Ben Clark from the sensor station. "They're bigger than anything in our fleet, sir." Jake nodded and ordered the crew to prepare for contact. The ships that appeared on their screens were unlike anything humans had ever built. They looked like giant spears made of dark metal, each one stretching for miles. Strange energy patterns danced along their hulls, creating an otherworldly glow in the darkness of space. A communication signal reached the Defiance, and the main screen flickered to life. The being that appeared made Jake's blood run cold. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in thick scales that gleamed like polished armor. Its eyes burned with a red light, and when it spoke, its voice rumbled like thunder. "I am War Commander, Thexnel of the Zelkari Empire," the creature announced. "You are trespassing in our territory. Identify yourselves and state your purpose." Lisa stepped forward, following her training. "I am Captain Lisa Rodriguez, representing the United Earth Alliance. We come in peace, seeking friendship and trade with your people. We had no knowledge that this system belonged to anyone." Thexnul's expression showed no emotion. "Ignorance is not an excuse. The Zelkari Empire has ruled this sector for 3,000 of your years. All species within our borders must submit to our authority or face extinction." Jake felt his jaw tighten. The alien's words left no room for misunderstanding. This was not a request, but a demand. Lisa tried to maintain her diplomatic composure as she responded. "We respect your claim to this territory," Lisa said carefully. "Perhaps we can discuss terms for peaceful coexistence. Surely there's room in this vast galaxy for both our species to prosper?" The War Commander's laugh was like grinding metal. "You speak of coexistence as if you have a choice. The Zelkari do not negotiate with inferior species. You will surrender all your colonies, your technology, and your vessels to the Empire. Your people will serve us as we see fit." Jake stepped beside Lisa, his voice firm but controlled. "That's not going to happen. Humanity values its freedom above all else. We won't submit to anyone." Thexnel's eyes narrowed. "Then you have chosen death. The Zelkari Empire has conquered over 400 species. Some submitted immediately and were allowed to live as servants. Others resisted and were wiped from existence. You will join one of these groups." The alien commander gestured, and data began flowing across the screen. Jake watched in growing horror as he saw the scope of the Zelkari Empire. Thousands of worlds under their control, hundreds of conquered species, and military might that dwarfed anything humanity possessed. "Your primitive weapons cannot penetrate our shields," Thexnel continued. "Your ships move like insects compared to ours. Your colonies are defenseless against our plasma cannons. Resistance is not only futile, but laughably pathetic." Lisa made one final attempt at diplomacy. "War Commander, surely your empire is vast enough without adding our small corner of space. We offer trade, knowledge sharing, cultural exchange. War benefits no one." "War benefits the strong," Thexnel replied coldly. "The Zelkari grow stronger with each conquest. Your technologies will become ours. Your worlds will feed our expansion. Your people will serve our greater purpose or cease to exist." Jake had heard enough. "Then we reject your demands. Humanity will defend itself." The War Commander's scaled face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Defend yourselves with what? We have studied your pathetic vessels. Your strongest weapons are like toys to us. Your fastest ships cannot outrun our slowest scouts. You have no allies, no superior technology, and no hope of victory. Thexnel leaned forward, his red eyes burning brighter. I will give you one rotation of your planet to consider surrender. Send word to all your colonies. Tell them the Zelkari. Empire comes. Those who submit will live as slaves. Those who resist will die as examples. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Defiance in shocked silence. Jake looked at his crew, seeing fear and determination warring in their faces. Lisa placed a hand on his shoulder. Admiral, their technology is clearly superior. Maybe we should consider their terms, she said quietly. Jake shook his head. Lisa, humanity didn't crawl out of caves and reach for the stars just to bow down to the first bully we met. Send a message to Earth. Tell them we've found an enemy that thinks humans can be conquered. He turned to face his crew, his voice carrying across the bridge. They may have better ships and stronger weapons, but they've made one critical mistake. They don't know who they're dealing with. Outside the viewport, the Zelkari fleet began forming up for their jump to Earth coordinates, confident that this would be another swift conquest in their long history of victory. The emergency signal from Admiral Morrison reached Earth in less than 6 hours through the quantum communication network. President Helen Carter sat in the crisis room deep beneath the Capitol, surrounded by humanity's top military and scientific minds. The holographic display showed the grim reality of their situation. General Ryan Blake stood before the assembled council, his weathered face grave as he delivered his assessment. The Zelkari possess overwhelming technological superiority. Their plasma weapons can vaporize our largest ships in seconds. Their energy shields deflect everything in our arsenal. Their faster-than-light drives are generations ahead of ours. Helen listened to the reports flowing in from intelligence services across human space. Every analysis reached the same conclusion. In a conventional war, humanity would last perhaps weeks before complete annihilation. The room fell silent as the weight of their situation settled over everyone present. Dr. Alex Chen, head of the Colonial Defense Initiative, cleared his throat. With respect, General Blake, I believe we're approaching this problem incorrectly. The Zelkari expect us to fight like every other species they've conquered. They expect centralized fleets, defensive formations, and predictable tactics. Helen leaned forward. What are you suggesting, Doctor? Alex activated a new display showing human colonial territories. We implement something the galaxy has never seen before, the Hydra Protocol. Instead of concentrating our forces where they can be destroyed, we scatter them everywhere. Every colony, every ship, every outpost becomes an independent resistance cell. General Blake frowned. That's not a military strategy, it's guerrilla warfare on a galactic scale. How can scattered forces hope to resist an empire? Because scattered, forces can't be conquered, Alex replied. The Zelkari have spent 3 millennia perfecting the art of defeating organized armies. They've never faced an enemy that refuses to organize into something they can destroy. Commander Kate Sullivan, fresh from the frontier colonies, spoke up from her position near the back of the room. Dr. Chen is right. On New Denver, we've already started implementing these tactics. Our mining equipment can be converted into weapons. Our knowledge of asteroid fields gives us advantages no Zelkari commander could understand. Helen studied the faces around her. Fear was present, but also determination. Explain how this would work, Commander. Kate moved to the display, highlighting various colonial worlds. Instead of building massive defensive installations that scream, "Target me," we create thousands of small, hidden bases. We use hit-and-run tactics. We exploit our intimate knowledge of local environments. We make them fight for every rock in space. Engineer Marcus Johnson joined the discussion. I've been analyzing the Zelkari ship data Admiral Morrison transmitted. Their shields are incredibly advanced against energy weapons, but they've never been tested against kinetic projectiles at relativistic speeds. We can retrofit civilian vessels with experimental railguns. Railguns? General Blake asked. Magnetic acceleration systems, Marcus explained. We launch solid projectiles at enormous velocities. Their shields are designed to disperse energy, not stop physical objects moving at significant fractions of light speed. Dr. Chen nodded enthusiastically. This is exactly what I mean. We don't try to match their technology. We exploit its weaknesses using approaches they've never encountered. Helen stood and walked to the main display. How quickly can we implement this across all human territories? The beauty of the Hydra protocol is its simplicity, Alex replied. We're not building new infrastructure. We're repurposing what already exists. Mining lasers become weapons, cargo ships become missile platforms, scientific equipment becomes surveillance networks. Commander Sullivan added, the colonists are already motivated. They've heard about the Zelkari ultimatum. They're not waiting for orders from Earth. They're converting their equipment and preparing defensive positions. Helen turned to General Blake. Ryan, I know this goes against everything you've learned about warfare, but do you see any alternative? The general was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical displays. It's insane. It violates every principle of military doctrine. It turns our entire civilization into a battlefield. He paused. It might actually work. The Zelkari will arrive expecting to find our fleets arranged in defensive formations, Alex continued. Instead, they'll find empty space and silent worlds. They won't know that thousands of human eyes are watching them from hidden positions throughout each system. Marcus pulled up new technical specifications. I can have railgun modifications distributed to every colonial engineering team within days. The designs are simple enough that any competent mechanic can implement them. What about coordination? Helen asked. How do we ensure these scattered cells work together? Dr. Chen smiled. We don't coordinate them in the traditional sense. Each cell operates independently, but they all follow the same basic principles. Hit hard, disappear, hit again somewhere else. The Zelkari will find themselves fighting a war against an enemy they can never pin down. Commander Sullivan nodded. The miners on New Denver have already started practicing these tactics. They use their excavation charges to hurl asteroids at mock targets. They've turned their mining tunnels into a maze that no outsider could navigate. And if this fails? General Blake asked. Helen looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. Then we fail fighting for our freedom instead of dying on our knees. Send the activation codes to every colony, every ship, every outpost. Tell them the Hydra protocol is now in effect. Dr. Chen began issuing orders to his team. I want modification kits sent to every human settlement within 72 hours. Include instructions for converting civilian equipment into defensive systems. Make sure every colonist understands they're not just defending their homes, they're defending the concept of human freedom. Marcus was already working on his tablet. The railgun specifications are being transmitted now. I'm also sending designs for improvised explosive devices, sensor networks, and camouflage systems. General Blake sighed but began coordinating with his staff. I'll alert all military commands to prepare for distributed operations. This is going to be the strangest war in human history. Commander Sullivan prepared to return to the colonies. The frontier settlements are ready, ma'am. We've been living independently for decades. We know how to survive, how to adapt, and how to fight dirty when necessary. Helen watched as her people transformed the crisis room into a coordination center for humanity's most desperate gamble. When the Zelkari arrive, they'll find something they've never encountered before. Not an army to defeat, but a people who refuse to be conquered. Outside Earth's atmosphere, the first Zelkari scouts were already entering the outer edges of the solar system, confident they would find another quick victory waiting for them. War Commander Thexnel stood on the bridge of his flagship as the Zelkari fleet emerged from hyperspace near Proxima Centauri. The system appeared empty, except for a few scattered civilian vessels that quickly fled toward the inner planets. This matched his expectations perfectly. Every species they conquered followed the same pattern: panic, retreat, and ultimately futile last stands around their homeworlds. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Price crouched inside the hollowed-out asteroid designated Mining Station 7, watching the alien fleet through concealed sensors. Around him, 23 former miners and engineers waited silently, their hands resting on equipment that had been cutting rock just days ago. Now those same tools had been modified according to the specifications sent from Earth. "They're taking the bait," whispered Engineer Julie Adams, monitoring the sensor feeds. "The fake civilian ships are leading them exactly where we want them." Danny nodded, speaking quietly into his communicator. "All stations, maintain silence until they commit to the inner system. Remember, we hit hard and fast, then disappear before they can respond." The Zelkari fleet moved with practiced efficiency toward the planet, their massive ships gliding through space like predators approaching helpless prey. Thexnul had conquered 47 systems using identical tactics. Overwhelming force applied. At key strategic points always resulted in swift surrender. Dr. Amy Foster worked frantically in her hidden laboratory on the planet's surface, making final adjustments to her biological weapons. As the colony's chief biologist, she had spent years studying the unique microorganisms that thrived in Proxima Centauri's harsh environment. Now she was about to weaponize them against an alien invasion. "The atmospheric release system is ready," she reported to her team. "Once their ground forces land, they'll encounter organisms that their immune systems have never seen. More importantly, these organisms will interfere with their equipment in ways they can't predict." Captain Steve Morgan commanded a fleet of 12 cargo vessels that appeared to be fleeing toward the system's edge. Hidden within their cargo holds were railgun systems that Marcus Johnson's team had designed. Each ship looked helpless and defenseless, exactly as intended. "Maintain formation and keep running scared," Steve told his captains. "Let them think we're just terrified civilians. When they get close enough to inspect us, we show them what human ingenuity really means." The Zelkari fleet split into 3 groups as they approached the planet. This was standard doctrine: one group to secure orbital space, one to begin ground operations, and one to hunt down fleeing civilian vessels. Everything proceeded exactly as their military manuals prescribed. Thexnul watched the tactical display with satisfaction. "Begin planetary bombardment of the major population centers. Destroy their government buildings and military installations. Leave enough infrastructure for our occupation forces." The first plasma beams lanced down from orbit, vaporizing the Colonial Administrative Center and the primary spaceport. Secondary explosions lit up the planet's surface as fuel depots and equipment yards were consumed by alien fire. From space, it looked like another successful opening move. Danny Price waited until the Zelkari ships moved into optimal position before giving his order. "All mining stations, execute Operation Rockslide." Throughout the asteroid belt, dozens of concealed installations activated their excavation charges simultaneously. Massive chunks of rock, accelerated by precisely placed explosives, hurtled toward the alien fleet at incredible velocities. The Zelkari had never encountered weapons that used entire asteroids as projectiles. The first impacts caught the aliens, completely off guard. Their energy shields, designed to deflect plasma beams and particle weapons, offered no protection against multi-ton rocks traveling at orbital velocities. 3 Zelkari vessels were crippled instantly, their hulls cracked. "Open like eggs!" "Impossible," Thexnul snarled as damage reports flooded his command center. "Their primitive weapons cannot penetrate our shields." His tactical officer looked confused. "War Commander, these aren't weapons in any conventional sense. They're using the asteroids themselves as projectiles. Our shields cannot process that much kinetic energy." On the planet's surface, Amy Foster activated her biological warfare systems as Zelkari ground troops began landing. Clouds of specially modified organisms were released into the atmosphere around each landing zone. The aliens' sophisticated, Environmental suits protected them from the microorganisms, but their equipment was not so fortunate. Within hours, Zelkari communication systems began experiencing mysterious failures. Their plasma rifles fired intermittently. Their vehicle engines developed inexplicable power fluctuations. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't see or understand. Ground forces report widespread equipment malfunctions. A Zelkari officer reported to Thex Null. Our engineers cannot determine the cause. The failures appear random, but are becoming more frequent. Captain Steve Morgan's cargo fleet continued its apparent retreat until the Zelkari pursuit ships moved within range. Then the false cargo containers opened, revealing railgun batteries that had been carefully concealed. Solid projectiles launched at relativistic speeds punched through Zelkari shields like they were made of paper. All ships, fire and scatter, Steve commanded. Hit them hard and get out before they can return fire. The Zelkari pursuit group found itself under attack from weapons that behaved unlike anything in their databases. The cargo ships disappeared into the outer system before their plasma cannons could lock onto targets, leaving behind 3 heavily damaged alien vessels. Thexnel's confusion turned to anger as more reports arrived. His overwhelming technological advantage seemed meaningless against enemies who refused to fight conventionally. The humans used tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. War Commander, we're receiving distress calls from Mining Station Omega. His communications officer reported. They're under attack by rocks, sir. Another mining station had launched a barrage of asteroids at a Zelkari supply convoy. The aliens had been expecting to face defensive satellites or missile platforms, not weaponized space debris. Their tactical computers couldn't calculate effective responses to threats that weren't actually weapons. Danny Price coordinated the next phase of attacks from his hidden command center. Team 7, hit their communication relay. Team 12, target their supply depot. Everyone else keep moving and stay hidden. The Zelkari found themselves fighting a war against an enemy that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Every time they moved to attack a human position, they found empty rock and abandoned equipment. Meanwhile, their own forces suffered constant harassment from weapons that shouldn't exist. Dr. Foster watched her biological agents spread through the Zelkari ground forces. The aliens' immune systems were handling the microorganisms effectively, but their technology was failing in increasingly dramatic ways. Vehicles stopped working. Communication equipment produced only static. Weapon systems fired randomly or not at all. It's working better than we hoped, she reported to the Resistance Network. Their equipment is designed for sterile environments. They've never encountered organisms that actively interfere with electronic systems. Thexnel stood before his tactical display, watching his perfect plan crumble into chaos. For the first time in his military career, he faced an enemy that seemed immune to superior firepower. The humans fought like animals, using terrain and environment as weapons. Order all ground forces to fall back to secure positions, he commanded. Recall the pursuit squadrons. We need to reassess our approach to this primitive species. His aide looked uncertain. War Commander. Falling back from primitive opponents will look like defeat to the High Command. Thexnel's scaled face twisted with rage. This is not defeat. This is a tactical adjustment. These humans fight without honor, using tricks and deception. We will adapt our strategies and crush them properly. But deep in his mind, a small voice whispered something the Zelkari had never experienced before. Doubt. For the first time in 3,000 years, a Zelkari conquest was not proceeding according to plan. News of the Zelkari struggles in human space spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Ambassador Patricia Lewis sat in the luxurious meeting chamber of the Corvani Republic, watching as alien representatives whispered among themselves, in languages she was still learning to understand. The Corvani had been conquered by the Zelkari 30 years ago, and until now they had accepted their fate as permanent. Zara Tell, The Corvani resistance leader studied the tactical data Patricia had brought with careful attention. Her forearms moved gracefully as she manipulated the holographic display, examining human fighting techniques that seemed impossible to her people. "Your species uses asteroids as weapons," Zaratel said, her translated voice filled with wonder. "You turn civilian ships into warships. You make the environment itself fight against invaders. We never considered such approaches." Patricia nodded, sharing more intelligence gathered from the ongoing conflict. "Humans learned long ago that superior technology means nothing if you can make the enemy fight on your terms instead of theirs. We don't try to match Zelkari firepower. We make their firepower irrelevant." Back in human space, Admiral Morrison coordinated with civilian leader Joe Carter to implement Operation Dandelion. The plan was simple but revolutionary. Share every successful human tactic with every resistance cell across all occupied territories. Like dandelion seeds carried by wind, human knowledge would spread faster than the Zelkari could suppress it. The mining station techniques are being adapted for use in 17 different star systems, Joe reported from his command center on Luna. Colonial engineers are developing new variations based on local resources and environments. Dr. Nina Baker worked tirelessly in her medical facility, developing applications of human healing technology that would keep resistance fighters operational despite injuries. Her rapid healing compounds allowed human forces to maintain pressure, even when taking casualties that would sideline conventional soldiers for weeks. "The biofoam injections are reducing recovery time by 70%. She explained to her research team. "Burns that should take months to heal are closing in days. Broken bones are mending in hours instead of weeks. Our people can keep fighting when any other species would be forced to retreat." The Zelkari High Command gathered in their war room aboard the massive command ship, Eternal Dominion. Fleet Admiral Kekstar studied reports from the human front with growing concern. Never in Zelkari history had a conquest taken this long or produced such unusual tactical problems. "War Commander Thexnul requests additional forces," Kekstar announced to the assembled commanders. He claims the humans use unconventional tactics that require new approaches. General Vex Noth, veteran of 50 successful conquests, examined the tactical reports with disbelief. "These humans fight like vermin. They hide in holes and strike from shadows. They use civilian equipment as military hardware. This is not warfare. It is terrorism." War Commander Thexnul himself appeared on the main communication screen, his scaled face showing signs of strain. "Honored commanders, I must report that human resistance exceeds all projections. They do not fight in formations we can destroy. They do not defend positions we can attack. They appear, strike, and vanish like phantoms." Fleet Admiral Kekstar leaned forward. "You are telling us that the mighty Zelkari military cannot defeat a species that has not even achieved our level of technology?" "Their technology is irrelevant," Thexnul replied. "They make weapons from mining equipment. They turn space debris into projectiles. They weaponize microorganisms. Every principle of military science becomes meaningless against such opponents." Meanwhile, intelligence operative Sam White had infiltrated Zelkari communication networks using techniques that exploited their over-reliance on encryption technology. He discovered that several conquered species were planning coordinated uprisings, inspired by human resistance methods. "The Alterans are building hidden bases in their mountain ranges," Sam reported to Earth Command. "The Centauri are converting their fishing fleets into mobile weapon platforms. The Vegan colonies are developing biological weapons based on our bacterial warfare techniques." On New Denver, Commander Kate Sullivan led her miners in increasingly bold attacks against Zelkari positions. They had learned to use the planet's unstable geology as a weapon, triggering landslides and earthquakes that buried alien equipment under tons of rock. "The Zelkari keep trying to establish permanent bases," Kate explained to her team. "They don't understand that this planet doesn't want permanent anything. We just help it express its natural instincts." Dr. Amy Foster had expanded her biological warfare program beyond simple equipment interference. Her latest organisms actively consumed certain metals used in Zelkari technology, causing structural failures that appeared completely random to alien engineers. "Their ships are literally falling apart," she reported with satisfaction. "The organisms I designed eat the specific alloys in their hull plating. They'll need to completely rebuild their manufacturing processes to develop resistance." The psychological impact on Zelkari forces was becoming severe. Soldiers who had never experienced defeat found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, jumping at shadows, and questioning their own equipment. Morale collapsed as reports of successful human attacks continued pouring in from across the front. Captain Steve Morgan had expanded his fake cargo fleet into a major tactical deception. Zelkari forces now feared every civilian vessel, never knowing which ones carried hidden weapons and which were actually harmless. This forced them to waste enormous resources investigating every ship in their territory. "They're spending more time checking cargo manifests than fighting," Steve laughed during his briefing to Earth Command. "Paranoia is our most effective weapon." The Corvani resistance, inspired by human tactics, launched their first major operation in decades. Using modified agricultural equipment, they destroyed a Zelkari supply depot that had seemed impregnable. The success sent shockwaves through both the occupation forces and the galactic community. Zaratel contacted Patricia with news of their victory. "Your people have given us something we thought was lost forever: hope. Other species are watching. The word is spreading that the Zelkari can be beaten." Patricia smiled as she prepared her next diplomatic mission. "Hope is contagious, and humans are excellent at spreading infections." Dr. Nina Baker received reports that her medical innovations were being adapted by resistance movements on dozens of worlds. Species with different biologies were modifying her techniques to work with their own physiology, creating a galactic network of enhanced resistance fighters. "We're not just fighting for human freedom anymore," she realized. "We're fighting for the freedom of every species that refuses to accept conquest as inevitable." Admiral Morrison studied the strategic situation from his command ship. The Zelkari Empire, which had seemed invincible just months ago, was now fighting simultaneous uprisings across their territory. Their forces were stretched thin, their morale was cracking, and their reputation for invincibility was shattered. "The galaxy is learning that conquest is not inevitable," he told his staff. "Every successful resistance operation proves that the Zelkari can be beaten. Every tactical innovation we share makes other species stronger." War Commander Thexnul found himself facing a crisis that no amount of military training had prepared him for. His enemies were multiplying faster than he could defeat them, and each victory seemed to inspire 10 new resistance cells to form. "Request permission to deploy planet-killer weapons," he transmitted to the High Command. "Conventional. Conquest appears impossible against these organisms." Fleet Admiral Kekstar's response was immediate and harsh. "Denied. Deploying planet killers would be an admission that the Zelkari military cannot defeat inferior opponents. Find another way or be replaced." The war that was supposed to last weeks had become a grinding conflict that threatened the very foundation of Zelkari power. Across the galaxy, conquered species watched with growing hope as the empire that had seemed eternal showed signs of weakness for the first time in 3 millennia. The massive Zelkari warship Endless Victory emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, dwarfing everything else in the void. Captain Ben Clark watched from Luna Base as the ship approached, its hull stretching for nearly 20 miles and bristling with enough firepower to sterilize entire continents. This was the Zelkari Empire's ultimate weapon, deployed when all other options had failed. War Commander Thexnul stood on the bridge of the Devastator-class vessel, his pride wounded by months of humiliating defeats. The High Command had given him one final chance to prove that Zelkari superiority was absolute. If this ship could not crush human resistance, his career and possibly his life would end in disgrace. "Begin the demonstration," Thexnul ordered, his weapons officer. Target their largest moon. Show these primitives what happens to species that defy the Empire. Captain Clark activated Luna Base's emergency protocols as the Endless Victory's main cannon began charging. Energy readings spiked beyond anything in human databases as the weapon prepared to fire. Every human in the solar system watched in terror as death itself approached their homeworld. Engineer Rosa Martinez worked frantically in the Lunar Mass Driver Control Center, making final calculations for humanity's most desperate gambit. For weeks, human engineers had been converting Luna's mining infrastructure into something the galaxy had never seen: a weaponized celestial body. All mass drivers are aligned and ready, Rosa reported to Clark. We've got one shot at this. If it fails, there won't be a Luna base left to try again. The mass drivers were humanity's answer to impossible odds. Instead of trying to build weapons that could match Zelkari technology, they had turned the moon itself into a projectile launcher. Billions of tons of lunar material could be hurled at orbital velocities using magnetic acceleration systems built into the moon's core. Dr. Chris Taylor monitored his computer virus from a hidden facility deep beneath Earth's surface. For months, human operatives had been quietly inserting code into Zelkari networks whenever they captured enemy equipment. The virus didn't destroy alien systems. Instead, it introduced tiny delays and calculation errors that would compound during crucial moments. The virus is active in 60% of their fleet, Chris reported to Earth Command. When they need their systems most, they'll find their technology slightly less reliable than usual. Across human space, resistance cells prepared for the largest coordinated operation in their species' history. Every hidden base, every converted civilian ship, every modified mining station would strike simultaneously. The goal was not to win a decisive battle, but to prove that humanity could not be broken. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Price crouched in his asteroid hideout, watching Zelkari reinforcements arrive in the Proxima system. His miners had spent months preparing for this moment, converting their entire asteroid belt into a massive weapon system. Remember, we hit everything at once, Danny told his teams. They can handle individual attacks, but they've never faced coordinated strikes from 1,000 positions simultaneously. The Endless Victory's main cannon reached full charge, and space itself seemed to distort around the massive weapon. Thexnel smiled as he prepared to demonstrate the futility of human resistance. One shot would vaporize Luna and leave Earth defenseless. "Fire!" he commanded. The plasma beam lanced across space toward Luna, carrying enough energy to crack open a small planet. But as it struck Luna's surface, something unprecedented happened. Instead of vaporizing the moon, the beam was absorbed by carefully placed energy collectors that Rosa Martinez's team had built into the lunar crust. Energy absorption at maximum, Rosa reported as Luna's mass drivers came online. All that power is being redirected into our launch systems. Captain, we're about to return their gift with interest. Luna's surface erupted as thousands of mass drivers fired simultaneously. The moon's own material, accelerated to incredible velocities by the energy from the Zelkari weapon, hurtled toward the Endless Victory in a storm of rock and metal that stretched across millions of cubic miles of space. Thexnel watched in horror as his ultimate weapon became the source of his destruction. The Devastator's shields, designed to handle any conventional attack, could not process the kinetic energy of billions of tons of lunar debris moving at orbital velocities. "Impossible," he whispered, as his ship's hull began to buckle under the bombardment. "No primitive species has ever turned our own weapons against us." Captain Clark coordinated the lunar bombardment while monitoring reports from across human space. At exactly the same moment Luna opened fire, every human resistance cell in the galaxy launched their own attacks. The Zelkari found themselves under assault from thousands of positions simultaneously. Commander Kate Sullivan's miners triggered geological upheavals across New Denver, burying Zelkari installations under avalanches that seemed like natural disasters. Dr. Amy Foster released her latest biological weapons, organisms that made Zelkari equipment malfunction in increasingly spectacular ways. Captain Steve Morgan's disguised cargo fleet attacked Zelkari supply lines throughout the sector, using weapons that the aliens still couldn't understand or counter effectively. Intelligence operative Sam White activated sleeper viruses in Zelkari communication networks, turning their own technology against them. The coordinated assault had a psychological impact that exceeded its tactical value. Zelkari forces across the galaxy found themselves under attack by enemies who struck from everywhere and nowhere, using weapons that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Dr. Chris Taylor watched his virus spread through Zelkari networks as their systems struggled to handle the massive coordinated assault. Navigation computers developed targeting errors, communication systems introduced delays, weapon systems experienced power fluctuations at critical moments. Their technology is turning against them, Chris reported with satisfaction. Every advantage they thought they had is becoming a liability. The endless victory shuddered under Luna's bombardment, its massive hull cracking like an eggshell. Thexnol's bridge crew worked frantically to restore their failing systems, but human viruses had infected their computers at the worst possible moment. "War Commander, we're losing structural integrity," his engineering officer reported. "The shields cannot handle this level of kinetic bombardment. We must retreat immediately." Thexnol's pride warred with his survival instinct as his ultimate weapon fell apart around him. The ship that was supposed to demonstrate Zelkari invincibility was being destroyed by primitives using their own moon as a weapon. Across the galaxy, Zelkari commanders received reports of simultaneous human attacks that seemed impossible to coordinate. Every system they controlled was experiencing resistance operations at the same time. Their communication networks were unreliable, their weapon systems were malfunctioning, their soldiers were demoralized. Fleet Admiral Kexdar watched the tactical displays from his command ship, seeing the scope of human coordination for the first time. These primitive organisms had somehow synchronized attacks across dozens of star systems without using any technology the Zelkari could detect or intercept. "How are they coordinating these operations?" Kexdar demanded of his intelligence officers. "What communication method are they using that we cannot monitor?" The answer would have terrified him. Humans weren't using technology to coordinate their attacks. They were using something the Zelkari had never developed: trust. Each resistance cell acted independently, knowing that thousands of others would act at the same time because that's what humans did when their species was threatened. The Endless Victory's hull finally cracked open, venting atmosphere and debris into space as the pride of the Zelkari fleet fell apart under humanity's most audacious assault. Thexnol found himself facing the impossible. His ultimate weapon had been defeated by primitives using rocks. As rescue ships moved to evacuate the dying vessel, the war commander stared at the tactical displays showing human attacks across the galaxy. For the first time in Zelkari history, their empire was not expanding. It was contracting, as species after species rose up in rebellion inspired by human example. The species that could not be conquered had done something far worse than resist. They had taught the galaxy that resistance was possible. The neutral space station, Haven's Rest, floated in the empty void between territories, its gleaming corridors filled with representatives from dozens of species. Admiral Jake Morrison walked through the diplomatic quarters, his footsteps echoing in the unusual silence that had fallen over the galaxy. War Commander Thexnol waited in the central chamber, his scaled frame looking smaller somehow than it had during their first encounter. The challenge to single combat had surprised everyone, including Morrison himself. Thexnol's pride, shattered by months of impossible defeats, demanded personal resolution to a conflict that had humiliated the entire Zelkari Empire. The war commander could not accept that primitives had consistently outmaneuvered his forces. "You have agreed to face me in honorable combat," Thexnol said, as Morrison entered the chamber. "Perhaps when I defeat you personally, Your species will understand the futility of their resistance. Morrison studied his opponent carefully. The Zelkari stood 8 feet tall, with muscles like steel cables beneath his scaled hide. His claws could cut through metal, and his species had evolved as apex predators on a world where strength determined survival. "I'm not here to prove anything to my species," Morrison replied calmly. "They've already proven everything that matters. I'm here because you need to understand something before this war destroys both our civilizations." The combat arena was simple, a circular platform surrounded by energy barriers that would contain the fight. Representatives from dozens of species watched from the observation galleries, including many whose worlds the Zelkari had conquered decades ago. Dr. Laura Mitchell watched from the human delegation, her anthropological studies of Zelkari psychology finally complete. She had spent months analyzing captured communications and behavioral data, searching for the key to understanding their enemies. The Zelkari evolved without significant competition, she had explained to Morrison before the fight. They became apex predators through individual excellence, not cooperative problem-solving. They've never learned to adapt quickly or think creatively under pressure. The combat began with Thexnel demonstrating the fighting techniques that had made his species legendary throughout the galaxy. His movements were perfect, his attacks devastating, his defense seemingly impenetrable. For the first few minutes, Morrison barely avoided being torn apart. But then something unexpected happened. Morrison began adapting, incorporating Zelkari combat techniques into his own fighting style. He used the war commander's momentum against him, turned predictable attacks into opportunities, and combined alien methods with human unpredictability. "Impossible," Thexnel snarled as Morrison landed his first significant blow. "You cannot master our combat forms in mere minutes." "I'm not mastering them," Morrison replied, dodging another strike. "I'm learning from them and making them my own. That's what humans do." Fleet Admiral Kexdar watched from the Zelkari observation deck, seeing his greatest warrior struggle against an opponent who should have been crushed instantly. The human moved like water, flowing around attacks and adapting to new situations faster than any Zelkari could match. The fight continued for nearly an hour, with Morrison gradually gaining ground through constant adaptation and innovation. He used techniques that Thexnel had never seen, combined fighting styles that shouldn't work together, and refused to follow any predictable pattern. "How do you fight without form?" Thexnel demanded, as another perfectly executed attack was turned against him. "How do you counter techniques you have never learned?" "Because fighting isn't about perfect techniques," Morrison answered, landing, a combination that staggered the larger alien. "It's about solving problems in real time. Humans have been doing that since we lived in caves." Dr. Mitchell took notes as she watched the combat, seeing her theories proven in real time. The Zelkari war commander was trapped by his own perfection, unable to adapt when his superior techniques were turned against him through creative thinking. Thexnel fell to his knees as Morrison's final attack found its mark. The humans improvised. Fighting style overcoming 3 millennia of Zelkari military tradition. The war commander looked up at his opponent with something approaching wonder. "How?" he whispered. "Your species is primitive. Your technology is inferior. Your military doctrine is chaos. How do you consistently defeat us?" Morrison helped the fallen warrior to his feet, showing respect even in victory. "Because we're not trying to be better than you at being Zelkari. We're being human, and that's something you can never prepare for." The answer came from Dr. Mitchell, who stepped forward to address both combatants. "Commander Thexnel, your species evolved as apex predators on a world without significant challenges. You developed overwhelming individual capabilities but never learned to adapt quickly or think outside established patterns." She gestured to Morrison. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters and social problem solvers. We survived by being adaptable, creative, and cooperative." Where you see obstacles to be overwhelmed with superior force, we see puzzles to be solved through ingenuity. Thexanul's expression showed comprehension for the first time. You do not fight like warriors. You fight like survivors. Every human is a survivor, Morrison confirmed. We've been solving impossible problems since our species began. Superior technology just gives us better tools for doing what we've always done. The news of Morrison's victory spread across the galaxy within hours, but its impact went far beyond a simple combat outcome. The defeat of the legendary Zelkari war commander in single combat shattered the last remnants of the Empire's psychological dominance. Fleet Admiral Grace Phillips arrived at Haven's Rest as reports flooded in from across Zelkari territory. Rebellion had erupted on dozens of conquered worlds simultaneously, inspired by proof that the Empire's greatest warriors could be defeated through human-taught tactics. The Alterans have liberated their homeworld, Phillips reported to the assembled delegates. The Corvani Republic has declared independence. The Centauri colonies have established a mutual defense pact. The dominoes are falling everywhere. Thexanul sat in the medical bay, his wounds treated by human doctors who showed him more kindness than he had ever shown conquered enemies. For the first time in his life, he began to understand what he had taken from the species his empire had crushed. "Why do you heal me?" he asked Dr. Nina Baker as she tended his injuries. "I came here to kill your admiral." "Because healing is what we do," she replied simply. "Humans believe in the possibility of redemption, even for enemies." The Zelkari Empire did not fall in a single day, but its collapse was inevitable once the galaxy learned that conquest was not permanent. Species that had accepted subjugation as their fate discovered they could fight back using techniques humans had shared freely with anyone willing to learn. Grace. Phillips worked with representatives from liberated worlds to establish the Galactic Defense Alliance, an organization dedicated to protecting smaller civilizations from future empires. The founding charter, written in dozens of languages, contained a single principle that would reshape galactic civilization. No species shall be conquered, for the galaxy has learned that even the mightiest can fall to those who refuse to surrender. Years later, Captain Jerry Thompson commanded a human exploration vessel entering a newly discovered sector of space. His ship, the UES Persistence, carried representatives from dozens of species and embodied the cooperative spirit that had replaced imperial dominance. When they encountered the Krillian hegemony, another militaristic empire demanding immediate surrender. Thompson smiled and activated a beacon that would bring help from across the galaxy. Within days, ships from 50 different species arrived, all carrying weapons and tactics developed from human innovations. "We are the Galactic Defense Alliance," Thompson announced to the Krillian commander. "We represent free civilizations throughout this galaxy. Conquest is no longer acceptable. Choose cooperation or face consequences." The Krillian fleet, outnumbered and facing weapons they couldn't understand, chose to negotiate rather than fight. Another potential empire was stopped before it could begin. Another species learned that freedom was worth defending. Humanity's greatest victory had not been defeating the Zelkari Empire. It had been teaching the galaxy that some things are worth fighting for, that creativity and determination could overcome any technological advantage, and that the spirit of freedom was the most contagious force in the universe. The species that could not be conquered had become the species that ensured no one else would be conquered either. In a galaxy that had known only the law of the strong, humans had introduced something revolutionary, the possibility that everyone could be free, and across the stars, in 1,000 different languages, the word for hope began to sound remarkably similar to the word for human.